What's good, everybody? Time for another Shane Says. Usually, I'm pretty snobby when it comes to who I care about. Wide receiver ones, running back ones, quarterback ones, tight end ones. And even within that, I get even more snobbish. Always talking about how I value the elite performers. But you can't just have all elite performers on your roster. As much as I would like to, that would be awesome, but you can't. So today I wanted to focus on another tier of player, wide receiver twos, right? Specifically, I wanted to see what were they before they were wide receiver twos the season prior, and what were they the season after they became wide receiver twos. So what I did is I went back to 2020, 21, 2, 3, and 4 for 5 years. 2020 through 2024, I got the wide receivers 13 through 24 from Fantasy Pros, and then did a little digging. Added them to column, added some rows, whatever. Did some stuff and found out some things. And I'm going to share them with you because it's kind of what I do. Anywho, so where do they come from? First of all, where do they come from? 27% were repeats. 27% were repeats from the previous season, right? It's 16 players, 16 out of 60 gives you 27%. So 27% of those players were from the prior season already wide receiver twos. They were just players that repeated the feat, if you will. 25% of them were players that were wide receiver ones the season prior and fell. They fell out of the good graces. They fell out of the area I care about, moved to this area, but I care about this area now. 25% of them, that's 1/4 of the players that were wide receiver twos this year, for instance, would have been wide receiver ones the previous year. Again, remember, I'm looking at the aggregate because I'm looking at 5 years worth of data. 22% rose up. They were wide receiver threes, and now they are wide receiver twos. They're going the way you want them to go, that way, right? Upward trajectory. 17% of these players came from wide receiver 4 or worse. That's a catch-all. Wide receiver 4 through, I think the worst I saw was wide receiver 9, I think. So somewhere in that range. Anyway, anything worse than a wide receiver 4, 17% of the players that were wide receiver 2s were previously wide receiver 4s or worse the season prior. And then we have our rookies, 8%. Very, very small part of the subset. 8% wide receiver 2s over the last 5 years were rookies. So what's this tell me? One, if I'm looking for immediate wide receiver 2 production, probably want to look elsewhere than using my rookie draft picks on a player. Again, only 8% of our wide receivers in this data set were rookies that were wide receiver 2s. And just so you know, I went back and then looked at wide receiver 1s, and that was another 8%. So total 16% give you top 24 seasons. Not the point of this show. This show is about wide receiver 2s. So only 8% gave you wide receiver 2 seasons. So you want to go ahead and not pick those players. If you're looking for wide receiver 2 production, you're probably better served trying to trade those players. Anyway, so again, you don't want to look at rookies if you need immediate help. Probably not going to give it to you. Other thing I noted or I saw, most wide receiver 2s were either a wide receiver 1, a wide receiver 2, or a wide receiver 3 the season prior to being a wide receiver 2, I should say. Generally means wide receiver 4s don't jump into that wide receiver 2 range, right? What did I say? It was 17%, or excuse me, 22% were wide receiver 3s. 22% were wide receiver 3s that jumped up to wide receiver 2s, which means, again, you don't generally go from wide receiver 3 to 2. You just don't. Not in the not by any large amount. Again, 22%. I can't think of the word I'm looking for. And wide receiver 4s give up. There's not going to be usable seasons from them. 17% of them jumped from wide receiver 4 to wide receiver 2 the following season. Not great, Bob. So Wide receiver 4s, LOL. That's your sleepers. That's what I think of your sleepers. Anyway. So I also wanted to see where these players were in the state of their career as far as like what season. So like I said, 8% of the wide receiver 2s in this data set were rookies, 8%. Another 17% were in their second year, and another 15% were in their third year. And then most of them, a majority of the players, 60% were in their fourth year or later. Interesting. I guess, So, I mean, I guess what that kind of speaks to is like the third year breakout for wide receivers. Again, not really a thing. It's not a thing. 17% in their second year. It's not great. We don't see a strong upward trajectory based purely on what year the player is in, right? Because if you did, you'd expect to see, but what I mean by upward trajectory is like you don't see a lot of year 4s, or excuse me, year 1s, and then year 2s, years, etc. You don't see an upward trajectory. The data suggests that most of the wide receiver production comes from players in their fourth season or later. So what I'm trying to say is you would expect, if it was a steady upward trajectory, second year players, for example, third year players should be your wide receiver 2s. But instead, it's players with 4 seasons or more under their belt. I found that interesting. I don't know if anyone else will, but I did. Excuse me. Apologies. Just had to get a little drink there. So, after your wide receiver 2, then what happens? How often do you stay wide receiver 2, or how often do you rise to be a wide receiver 1, or do you fall? How many times do you fall? What do you do basically? What have you become after your wide receiver 2 season? Well, note, this is only 48 players because I did not look at the players from 2024 because, well, the 2025 season hasn't happened yet. So they haven't had a chance to repeat, decrease, increase, none of the above. So 48 players, 2020 through 2023, 4 seasons, right? 20, 21, 2, 3, 4. 48 players. Thank you. So 29% of these players repeated and were wide receiver 2s. So what I'm saying is 29% of the time, I'm just going to say the same thing, 29% of the time, if you're a wide receiver 2, you repeat it as a wide receiver 2 the following season. Again, this is over the aggregate, not speaking to one specific year, but 29% of the time, that's what happened. So that's 14 total players, right? 14 into 48. Again, that's our subset, and that gives you a good 29%. That's where we go, 14 players. So I was wondering, I wanted to get a little deeper, a little further in. Do wide receiver 2s at the high end repeat at a higher rate than wide receiver 2s at the low end, the bottom, the power bottom? Who repeats more often? And what I found is neither. Neither is the answer. It's even. Wide receiver 13 through 18 repeated 7 times in this data set. Wide receiver 19 through 24 repeated 7 times. So wide receiver 13, wide receiver 20 basically had the same chance of repeating the following season as a wide receiver 2. Thought that was interesting. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, whatever. 18% became wide receiver 1s. Okay. 18% went on. They did what you're supposed to do, right? They were wide receiver 2s, and then they took the elevator and became wide receiver 1s. They moved up the way you wanted to. It's just trajectory. That word was a little difficult for me to say. And then 15% became wide receiver 3s. But let's get back to that, or let's go back to something. If 29% of the wide receiver 2s went on to be wide receiver 2s the next season, and another 18% went on to be wide receiver 1s, that means nearly half the time, 47% of the time, a wide receiver 2 will give you a top 24 season the following year. That's pretty good odds. Pretty good. Not great. Pretty good, though. But again, if you wanted to add wide receiver 3 seasons into this mix, that's another 15%. So that means we would have 62% of the time a wide receiver 2 goes on and gives you a top 36 season the following season. I know wide receiver 3 seasons are kind of replaceable. Not kind of, they are. But most of us play in leagues where you have to start 3 wide receivers, and I'm sure we're flexing some wide receivers in there as well. So top 36 wide receiver season is not to be sneezed at, not to be dismissed. So some takeaways here, right? It doesn't seem that finishing as a wide receiver 2 guarantees that you're going to jump to wide receiver 1 status. Just 18%. That's less than 1/5. Nice numbers, math. Less than 1/5 of the time do you jump up to wide receiver 1. Again, this is showing me there's not really upward trajectories when it comes to being a wide receiver 2. It's not really a stepping stone. 1/5 of the time, less than that, you become a wide receiver 1. But you're just as likely, well, almost just as likely to fall to be a wide receiver 3, 15% of the time. So it doesn't guarantee that you're going to move up to wide receiver 1. Just wanted to put that out there. What it does guarantee, almost, well, not really, but what it does at a high rate, 62% of the time, tells you or will lead to a wide receiver 3 season or better the following season, which, that's not bad. Not bad. I mean, I guess it depends on your perspective, right? Is a 38% fail rate, what I'll come up with, fail rate, is that good or bad? I think personally right now, I would prefer to move rookie picks for wide receiver 2s. Now, why is that? Again, wide receiver 2s, they're not rookies, right? We went through this already. Only 8% of them. So if you are looking for instant production, you're a contender, whatever. You're looking for instant production, you're better off probably using a rookie pick in a deal than you are for making the pick. Now, obviously, it depends on the pick, right? Like I'm talking like second rounders. I'm not talking like 101. Don't quote me or don't go out there and saying I said trade Ashton Genty for Cooper Kupp. Not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is later picks, right? Second round picks, not later, but second round picks and such. I think I'd be on board with moving those for wide receiver 2s, the players that were wide receiver 2s, and just bank on or go off the odds that they'll at least give me a top 36 season at 62% of the time. I think that's fair. So I also wanted to see, based on where you were in your where you were in your season, like what year, second, third, fourth, etc., the chances that you repeat. So basically, a player in his second year, if he's a wide receiver 2, how often does he go on to be a wide receiver 2 again? Pretty good amount of the time, 40%. Third year players were at 33%, 40% fourth year or later. That's high, but remember that's a catch-all, because fourth year or later is literally fourth year and infinity. I don't think anyone's played to infinity, but I think it's interesting, I guess. Interesting. I used interesting a lot. But like I said, 40% of the time, it appears, 40% of the time that a second year player becomes a wide receiver 2, they go on to produce as a wide receiver 2 later. A lot of numbers, I promise you. I know that. So a couple big takeaways. Couple big takeaways. Rookies do not usually give you wide receiver 2 production. It's just generally doesn't happen. Players that do hit as a wide receiver 2 generally have a top 24 season in them after that, including wide receiver 1s, 47% of the time. 47% of the time, they're either a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2 the following season. I like my odds there. I do. Like I said, that's about half, about a coin flip. That's fine. And going back to something I talked about earlier, there's really no difference between a high-end wide receiver 2 and a bottom-end wide receiver 2. They go on to repeat the following season at basically the same rate. Again, this is just a production discussion, not value, obviously. I'm not talking about, a wide receiver 2 in their rookie season, a wide receiver 2 in their second season compared to Cooper Kupp. Obviously, that player is more valuable than what Cooper Kupp is. But to that point, right? How do you buy this production? So you probably don't want to buy high-end production, or at least players, high-end assets like, well, you do want to buy, but it will be more expensive if you wanted to get wide receiver twos like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Rashee Rice. Those players are going to cost more. If you want to take a lower end shot at, right, it might get you lower yields. But if you wanted to take a lower shot, you could take a shot on players like Jerry Jeudy, Cooper Kupp, even Steph Diggs. I know he's coming back from injury, but those are the cheaper players. Jacoby Myers. Like, these are all dudes that have been wide receiver twos, some multiple times, but were wide receiver twos last year and could go on based on the numbers. There's a good chance. I don't know if good's a strong word, but either way, there's a chance, probably better than the general population, that these players can go on to be wide receiver twos again. So I was wondering, what do these players cost? What's it cost to acquire them? So I went ahead, brought up Dynasty Daddy. Just going to look up a couple players and just see how cheap can you get these players. One of my favorite players, I love this guy, is Jacoby Myers. What can he be had for? What do you have to pay to get Jacoby Myers on your roster today? Not a lot, Bob. Javonte Williams and a 2026 second. Give me my boy Jacoby. Jacoby Myers and a 308 for Dalton Kincaid in a 1-point tight end premium. I think he should probably do better than Jacoby Myers. Love you, Jacoby, but not going to take you there. Jacoby Myers for a 26 second and a 25 307. Myers all day. Jacoby Myers for a second. Couple of package deals, not really what I'm looking for. Oh, Christian Watson for Jacoby Myers. Like, come on, dude. Like, these are just second round picks. Jacoby Myers, Christian Watson. Like, these are not expensive players to get. At least Jacoby Myers isn't. Let's look at Steph Diggs. I would think he's cheap. He's elderly, and he's coming back from significant injury. So let's just see what you can get him for. Oh, Deebo Samuel and Steph Diggs, or Steph Diggs in around 4. Okay, you're getting the extra asset, doing a little process deal, a little leverage deal, getting a little more. Okay, I got you. Here he is, 304 for Steph Diggs, and you get the 403 and the 411 back. Okay. Give me the Diggs. Give me the Diggs. Just going down here. Jalen Waddle and Steph Diggs, which is blasphemous. I don't know what that person was thinking. They gave up Jalen Waddle. Maybe they lost a bet. I'm not really sure. Anyway, then one more. We'll just look at Steph Diggs or the 309 and the 509. Yeah, there's not a chance. Just absolutely not a chance that I would not get Steph Diggs on my roster for that. So as you can see, there are wide receiver twos that are cheap, fairly cheap, very cheap, super cheap. Again, players like Drake London, Garrett Wilson, they're going to cost more because they have more value on the open market. This is just a production discussion. That's really all I was talking about. Nothing about value, because value is different, obviously. A younger wide receiver 2 is going to be more valuable than a older wide receiver 2 and an injured wide receiver 2 and I guess that's really just those two. So that's it. Again, just wanted to take a look at the wide receiver 2s, kind of where they came from. What do they do after the fact? Just going to reiterate a couple things because I know I throw a lot at you. So 27% of the time, the wide receiver 2 was a wide receiver 2 the season prior. 25% of the time, they were wide receiver 1. So 52% were either a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2 prior to the season that I looked at when they were wide receiver 2s. Rookies, no bueno. 8%, only 8% were hitting that wide receiver 2 mark in their rookie year. If you want instant production, probably like we just went through, you want to go ahead and trade those players. Players that hit as a wide receiver 2 have a really good chance to give you a top 24 season after that, 47% of the time. And a good bit of those are a good chunk of those, 18% rose to be wide receiver 1s, which that ain't bad. So that's it. I appreciate everyone taking the time to watch the show. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, hit subscribe, hit like, Please add comments. Let me know anything you want to talk about. But, you know, I enjoy doing whatever pops in my little brain here, but I enjoy more doing what you guys want to see. So let me know what you're looking for. Like I said, subscribe, like, make sure you check out all the other content on the DDFB. I was about to call it Yoo-hoo, YouTube channel, not Yoo-hoo. Check out our YouTube channel if you're not already subscribed. Check out all the great content. Can't even list it all. We're generally dropping at least a video a day. And also check out the podcast feed. So appreciate y'all. Take care.